say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Joy-Ann Reid. It's titled The Man Who Sold America. This is from the introduction, titled Welcome to Gotham. To truly understand Donald Trump, you need to have lived in New York City in the 1980s and 90s when his businesses and marital escapades were a tabloid staple. Or maybe you just need to have grown up on Batman. Gotham City, which the brooding billionaire Bruce Wayne polices as his vigilante alter ego, is an exaggerated dystopian send-up of old New York. It's filled with over-the-top villains who, like Batman, possess no actual superpowers, but get by on their cleverness, their ostentatious wealth, and their ability to wreak havoc on the urban landscape. Donald Trump seems ripped right out of that comic book supervillain universe. With his cantilever hairstyle, weirdly long signature neckties, bizarre syntax, and penchant for slapping his surname on anything he's connected with, from buildings and golf courses to bottled water board games, and for a time a sham university that promised anyone could learn to be just like the Donald, Trump and the cast of characters surrounding him could fit right in with Joker, Riddler, Penguin, and Lex Luthor. Trump has existed on the outskirts of American celebrity and popular culture for the lifespans of most Americans under the age of 40. He made cameos in movies like Home Alone 2 and on TV shows such as The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. He was in the guest chair on The Phil Donahue Show and The Oprah Winfrey Show, and he performed mock fights with World Wrestling Entertainment Chairman Vince McMahon on multiple episodes of WrestleMania. He even pretended to buy WWE's lucrative Monday Night Raw franchise in an elaborate ruse in 2009, which tanked the entertainment company's stock price, prompting Trump to quickly pretend to sell it back for twice the price. Despite his history of housing discrimination against black tenants and his full-page ad in the 1980s calling for a group of black and brown teenagers to be put to death for a gang rape they didn't commit, Trump managed to work his way into mainstream popular culture. Early on, he was a tabloid-friendly rogue and celebrity hanger-on, and later the king of the B-list stars who jockeyed for his approval on Celebrity Apprentice. Had he not signed on to the racist birther conspiracy claiming that America's first black president, Barack Obama, was not born in the United States, and plunged headfirst into the morass of anti-immigrant xenophobia that helped him win the presidency, the old Donald Trump might have carried on. He may have remained a cultural gadfly, that peculiar brand of celebrity whose views on everything from geopolitics to the Oscars are sought out for no particular reason other than that he is famous and quotable. But Donald Trump did become president, and so here we are. As a candidate, Trump offered Republicans the taste of the celebrity status that Ronald Reagan had given them, something normally reserved for Democrats. That's what attracted Sam Nunberg, the 38-year-old political advisor who toiled on Trump's warm-up attempts at presidential runs and on the real presidential deal until he lost a war with Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski and was fired in the summer of 2015. Nunberg says Lewandowski saw to it that old racist posts on his Facebook page surfaced. He later apologized for those posts. And though Nunberg readily says that Trump screwed him, he claims he'd vote for him again in 2020 because Trump has delivered on Republican policies and judicial nominations. I knew our campaign wasn't doing well when I went into our restaurant after he announced, Nunberg said, or was doing well, excuse me. The TV was on CNN and he was on and people were watching. These were people who normally wouldn't give a S word, but they were watching him. Trump wasn't just another politician doing a TV hit. He was an American mogul, an entertainer, Nunberg said. And he wasn't rich from making microchips or selling stocks. It was from building, construction. It was this image of success, of him being rich and he can make you rich. We were the WWE, Fox News version of the Obama campaign in the beginning, and I mean that as a compliment. It was aspirational. It was, we can fight the system. Nunberg was raised on the Upper East Side of Manhattan and nurtured on conservative talk radio's strident support for Israel and suspicion of the Middle East. After volunteering for Mitt Romney's 2008 campaign, he worked for right-wing lawyer Jay Sekulow during the 2010 fight to prevent the construction of a mosque near Ground Zero, a site of 9/11. He says Trump wrote a BS letter at the time offering to buy the land where the mosque was to be built, but the offer was just a PR stunt. Nunberg's parents were lawyers, and so he became one too. His father had worked for a law firm that Trump and his father had used for real estate deals. But Nunberg didn't meet Trump in person until he was introduced to him in 2010 by yet another Gotham City character, Roger Stone, the villain with the Richard Nixon tattoo on his back. I wanted to win a national election and thought Trump could win, Nunberg says of his eagerness to sign on. I thought it was cool that Obama went on the late night shows. I thought the John McCain ad showing Obama speaking to millions of people and showing Paris Hilton slamming him as a Hollywood celebrity was the dumbest effing thing I'd ever seen. He said he all but screamed at the time, "You just won him millions of votes." Nunberg thought his party was living in the 1950s. And though Trump was his own version of the madman era, to Nunberg, he was a madman for the 21st century. He and Trump shared a sensibility. He likens to a retired New York City firefighter or cop who mainlines Fox News, plus Rush Limbaugh and Mike Levin on talk radio, and thinks to himself, this country's gone to crap, and we need a guy in the White House who's willing to punch a few holes in the wall. It's Joy-Ann Reid's book, The Man Who Sold Him. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Saturday, February 22nd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, the cover-up rolls on, but it's getting unraveled very rapidly. Top of the morning to you here, a beautiful rainy Thursday in Portland. There is so much I want to get into today, from, are we at peak Citizens United to what happens when the police get corrupted. That would specifically mean Mr. Barr, our Attorney General. Professor Richard Wolff will be with us in our second hour. When the Fed puts $500 billion into the repo market, where does the money come from? Where does it go? And where does it end up? How does that all work? And then we're going to, in our third hour in Science Revolution, Jayson O'Neill will be here to talk about the impact of the rollbacks to environmental law that we've been watching for 3 years with Donald Trump and all that sort of thing. But I want to start out by asking, what does conservative mean? What does that word mean anymore? Now, back in my dad's day, he thought he was a conservative, and Eisenhower represented himself as a conservative. And what they meant, and in fact what they said, was that, William F. Buckley famously said, a conservative is a man who stands a cross, or he used a word that started with an A, but anyway, stands astride the arc of history with his hand out shouting, stop. And that was, my dad's definition was, he'd say, I share all your goals for social progress in this country. It's just that we need to do them slowly, carefully, thoughtfully, so we don't disrupt our society. Now, that was used as an excuse by many conservatives to fight integration or desegregation, to, fight women's rights, to fight all kinds of things. My dad never made those specific arguments, but that's, that's how it was used. But I think that since 1978, really in a big way, 1979, I guess, would be the magic turning year. The definition of the word conservative has changed, and this is my take on this. And I'm going to get into Lev Parnas and all, what he said about Trump and Pence and Barr and all these people in just a minute as kind of a piece of this. But at its core, what we're seeing right now is that Donald Trump has corrupted pretty much every federal agency, from the EPA to the IRS to the Department of Justice. And that's the one that, frankly, I think should concern us the most, is the DOJ. Bill Barr ran the cover-up for Iran-Contra for George Herbert Walker Bush back in 1992, producing screaming headlines in the New York Times. I mean, this was Christmas Eve, 1992. The headline across the New York Times, all caps, 6 columns all the way across the front page. Bush pardons 6 in Iran affair, aborting a Weinberger trial, prosecutor assails cover-up. The day before Christmas, 1992, Bush had already lost the election to Bill Clinton. Clinton had not yet been sworn in as president. And with those pardons, George Bush shut down the Iran-Contra investigation, which would have revealed that both he and Ronald Reagan committed treason from the White House. Bill Barr covered that up. Proudly, apparently. And he's doing it again. And, now we see that, according to Lev Parnas, Bill Barr was in on this thing. Lev Parnas is saying, he knew what was going on. Now, consider this for a moment. Lev Parnas, this guy, last night on Rachel Maddow's show, this guy, and I guess also on Anderson Cooper's show, this guy called out Dmitry Firtash. This is a Russian or Ukrainian billionaire oligarch who is hiding in Vienna from a U.S. Extradition order. Now, billionaires from that part of the world are, I don't know, Firtash falls into this category, but broadly speaking, oligarchs from that part of the world have somewhat of a history of harming the people who speak out against them, number one. Number two, he's calling out Donald Trump. Donald Trump has famously said he could kill somebody and people would still vote for him. And indeed, there's been this long line of weird people who were involved with Trump's finances who have committed suicide in the last couple of years, including the guy who signed off on his loans at Deutsche Bank just a few months ago. So when you think about what Lev Parnas did, I mean, he took on the President of the United States, a billionaire oligarch who's been involved up to his eyeballs with organized crime all the way back to when his lawyer was also the lawyer for the Gambino family, for the number 1 crime family in New York City. So he's revealing things. This was the most bizarre moment in my mind in Rachel's interview last night. At the very end, she said, "Why are you saying all this stuff now publicly? Why are you doing it here instead of in a courtroom or someplace else?" And he basically said, "For my safety. I want this information to get out." He's basically, he didn't say it in these words, but he said, "For my safety." He wants this information to get out before somebody can kill him. It would just all go poof if they assassinated him. And it could look like a suicide, like happened with Jeffrey Epstein and apparently, some of these bankers that are around Donald Trump. Epstein had the dirt on Trump too. Or it could just be, hey, there's some nerve gas poison on the doorknob when you walk into your apartment. This is, what has happened in Europe in a couple of occasions. Consider that. This is pretty shocking. And at the head of our police is Bill Barr, who is apparently part of this criminal conspiracy. I mean, and literally every federal agency, every member of the House, the vice president, Donald Trump, he's corrupted them all. But I would argue that he was only able to do that because the definition of conservative changed in the 1970s, in the late 1970s. Now follow me on this. In 1976, in a case called Buckley versus Vallejo, the United States Supreme Court said, if a billionaire wants to run for political office, they can use their own money and there are no rules. Right? That decision in 76, that Buckley decision, is what gave us the Bloomberg candidacy, the Steyer candidacy, and the modern-day Republican Party. They also said in 76, if a very, very wealthy person wants to basically own a politician, give them so much money and so much support that they're largely responsible for that person being in office, that's not considered bribery. That's not considered setting up a corrupt deal. That's free speech, which is protected by the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment. 2 years later, in 1978, in a decision called First National Bank versus Bellotti, the Supreme Court said, oh, and by the way, we're extending this to corporations as well as to individuals, as well as to human beings. So that opened the door for just tons of money to flow into politics in 79. Now, in 1979, the Democratic Party, you know, a third of America was unionized, and the Democratic Party was getting most of their money from unions. So they were like, oh, okay, so rich people and corporations are in the game now along with us. You know, big whoop. But the Republicans, they were just, I mean, they were still shell-shocked from the Nixon scandals, which had happened just, you know, a few years earlier. And they had no idea what to do or where to go. They had no definition anymore of what Republican meant or what conservative meant, for that matter. So they did two things. Number one, they said, you know, okay, you know, we're for rent. You want a political party? Just throw the money at us. And just god-awful amounts of money just poured down into the Reagan campaign and into the Republican Party in 1979, 1980, and put Reagan in office and started the Reagan Revolution, which continues to this day. Because those laws are still, or those Supreme Court decisions are still to this day. In fact, they doubled down in 2020 with Citizens United. They tripled down in 2013 with McCutcheon and said an individual billionaire can own an unlimited number of politicians. There was a limit to the number that you could own. And then with the McDonald case, you know, Bob McDonald, the former governor of Virginia, he took over $100,000 in bribes. And they said, oh, no, those weren't bribes. Those were just gifts from a friend. And so, you know, here we are with the Republican Party. So, number one, they said, okay, we're for rent. And number two, they redefined conservative. And they said, conservative doesn't mean what Bill Buckley said. You know, that or that what Dwight Eisenhower or Tom's dad said, that, you know, we share these goals, these broad, wonderful egalitarian goals. We just think that we should take a little more time and go a little more slowly to get there to make sure we don't get anything wrong and we don't cause social disruption. They rejected that. And they said what conservative means now is small government. Now, why would that be consequential? Because the only power on earth that can hold back a billionaire or a multi-billion-dollar or trillion-dollar corporation, literally the only power that can hold them back, it's not you, it's not me, it's not the marketplace, it's not competition. The only power that can restrain them if they are engaging in behavior that is ripping us off and poisoning our planet, the only thing that can restrain them is government. So the Republicans and the conservatives redefined conservative to mean small government. And then they came up with another phrase, you know, fiscal conservatism, financial responsibility. You know, what does that mean? Balanced budgets and stuff like that. Well, what does that mean? What that means is we can't afford to pay for social programs anymore. We're going to end Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and we're going to turn those things over to the people who own us. We're going to give Social Security to 5 big banks in New York City. George W. Bush campaigned on this in 2005. And we're going to give Medicare and Medicaid to Citizens United. And George W. Bush did that in 2005 by signing into law legislation that created Medicare Part C, which is Medicare Advantage, privatizing Medicare. And now a third of all the people on Medicare, are using this privatized stuff. So what conservative means now is we are bought off and we are sellouts. Pure and simple. Do you think I'm crazy, or does this make sense? And if this makes sense, then it gives us a whole brand new understanding of why these guys, why these Republicans are doing what they're doing, why they're supporting Donald Trump, why all this stuff is happening. And I'll get into that after the break. Plus, we'll go through the details of what Lev Parnas had to say last night. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And I'm going to kick it off with a Jeff Tiedrich tweet. It's brilliant. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Beth in Ojai, California, listening on KPFK. Hey, Beth, what's up?
Hey, hi, Tom. Well, early on in your program, you mentioned nuclear energy, and I ran for my phone because right now there's a cover-up going on at San Onofre. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is being scammed because they're allowing Holtec, this loading company that makes canisters, they're allowing them to load damaged canisters at San Onofre, and they're actually Chernobyl-sized nuclear waste. It's a great risk to the public, and I'm calling to offer a solution.
Okay. Go for it.
Okay, my solution is that we stop Holtec from loading the canisters at San Onofre, and we start implementing what they use in Europe, which is the Holtec canisters are only a half inch to 5/8 inch thick, and they're 16 feet high. Now, in Europe, they use 18-inch thick casks, and that's what we should be using. Now, I heard that in Fukushima, the 18-inch casks didn't have that much damage to them. They still were viable even after what happened.
Why don't we just stop using nuclear power, Beth?
Well, the commission, we have, and actually San Onofre has
it's decommissioned?
Stopped. It is in the process. Now, the Costa Commission just gave Holtec, the same company that's privately owned that's loading the damaged canisters, the Costa Commission gave them permission to tear down San Onofre at a cost of $4 billion. Now, there's still the nuclear waste that's being loaded. First, before we do anything, we must have that nuclear waste safe in thick-walled canisters. They can't even be inspected, which is a requirement. So they're overlooking, and what they do is, if they do something wrong, then they're given an exemption for that. So it's really a dangerous situation, and I guess I'm a whistleblower calling and saying this.
So have you contacted any of the regulatory agencies or the state?
Oh, I'm in total contact with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. In fact, the head person that's at San Onofre now talked with me yesterday, and we're going to talk again today because we need to have a meeting held there so that we can tell them what's happening. And also, Governor Newsom should really get involved in this because it was his Coastal Commission that actually agreed to give Holtec over $4 billion. And now they're wanting another $500,000 on top of that.
Yeah.
So it's a shocking cover-up. It's corruption, really. And I believe that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, is being scammed by Holtec.
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, I don't know that much about it, but it sounds like a grim situation. Beth, thanks for the call and the heads up. Fascinating stuff. It's 22 minutes past the hour. When you try to discuss this with your friends who call themselves conservatives, how do they explain what conservative means? We'll be right back. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for the Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Saturday, February 22nd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. So and I'm assuming that, some of you have tried to explain, what I just laid out. I think it's fairly self-evident to some of us, to many of us. And I've been talking about this for years. I mean, for 15 years, we've had a contest on this show. Name one piece of legislation passed by Republicans that principally benefits average people. It doesn't exist. So, it's our little contest. So, when you ask your conservative friends what conservative means to them, what do they say? And how do you respond to it? I mean, obviously what's happened is that when the Republicans sold out to the billionaires and the big corporations, they knew that there were not enough voters among even the employees of big corporations and among the billionaires, certainly, to get them elected. So they had to bring along a whole bunch of folks. So they reached out to the white racists. Nixon started this with his silent majority, and then Reagan with his speech at the Nebosha, or whatever it is, county fair in Philadelphia, Mississippi. Reagan, started the modern day use of race, shall we say, by the Republican Party. So they reached out to the racists. Then they reached out to the white evangelical Christians, particularly the ones who are upset about women acquiring power in the workplace and political power, and said, okay, we don't want women to have the ability to really be autonomous beings anymore, so they have to be, locked down with barefoot and pregnant, end the right for abortion. I mean, this is pretty straightforward stuff. Jeff Tiedrich tweeted a couple days ago. He said, right now, some deplorable with a persistent cough is driving a crappy car on crumbling roads past abandoned storefronts to a low-paying job and pumping his fist and going, hell yeah, as he hears on Wingnut Radio about how Trump wants the Supreme Court to gut Obamacare. Think about that for a minute. I mean, that's what's going on. And these people think that they're conservatives. What does that mean? So we'll continue. I'll get back to that conversation in just a minute. There's a bunch of news here I want to be sure and get in, before we hit the break here in the first hour. The Trump administration broke the law. This is the Government Accounting Office, Government Accountability Office, the GAO. They said faithful execution of the law does not permit the president to substitute his own policy priorities for those that Congress has enacted into law. OMB withheld funds for a policy reason which is not permitted under the Impoundment Control Act. In other words, the OMB, Mick Mulvaney, at the direction of Donald Trump, broke the friggin' law.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of what we're learning from Lev Parnas, the crimes of all these Republicans. What does conservative mean? Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Medical Apartheid, the Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present by Harriet A. Washington. This is from the introduction. On a sylvan stretch of New York's patrician Upper Fifth Avenue, just across from the New York Academy of Medicine, a colossus in marble, august inscriptions, and a bas-relief caduceus grace a memorial bordering Central Park. These laurels venerate the surgeon James Marion Sims, MD, as a selfless benefactor of women. Nor is this the only statuary erected in honor of Dr. Sims. Marble monuments to his skill, benevolence, and humanity guard his native South Carolina's State House, its medical school, the Alabama Capitol grounds, and a French hospital. In the mid-19th century, Dr. Sims dedicated his career to the care and cure of women's disorders and opened the nation's first hospital for women in New York City. He attended French royalty, his Grecian visage inspired oil portraits, and in 1875 he was elected president of the American Medical Association. Hospitals still bear his name, including a West African hospital that utilizes the eponymous gynecological instruments that he at first invented for surgeries upon black female slaves in the 1840s. But this benevolent image vies with the detached Marion Sims portrayed in Robert Thom's J. Marion Sims, Gynecological Surgeon, an oil representation of an experimental surgery upon his powerless slave, Betsy. Sims stands aloof, arms folded, one hand holding a metroscope, the forerunner of the speculum, as he regards the kneeling woman in a coolly evaluative medical gaze. His tie and morning coat contrast with her simple servant's dress, head rag, and bare feet. The painting, commissioned and distributed by the Park Davis Pharmaceutical House more than a century after the surgeries, as one of its History and Medicine in Pictures series, takes telling liberties with the historical facts. Thom portrays Betsy as a fully clothed, calm slave woman who kneels complacently on a small table, hand modestly raised to her breast before a trio of white male physicians. Two other slave women peer around a sheet, apparently hung for modesty's sake, in a childlike display of curiosity. This innocuous tableau could hardly differ more from the gruesome reality in which each surgical scene was a violent struggle between the slaves and physicians, and each woman's body was a bloodied battleground. Each naked, unanesthetized slave woman had to be forcibly restrained by the other physicians through her shrieks of agony as Sims determinedly sliced, then sutured her genitalia. The other doctors who could fled when they could bear the horrific screams no longer. It then fell to the women to restrain one another. I wanted to reproduce Thom's painting on the cover of this book, or at least in the text, but when I asked permission of its copyright holder, Pfizer Incorporated, the company insisted on reviewing the entire manuscript of this book before making a decision. As an independent scholar, I could not acquiesce to this, and I used another cover image. When I renewed my request to use the image within the text, Pfizer agreed to base its decision upon reading this chapter and an outline of the book. The Pfizer executives apparently were uncomfortable with what they read because they refused to grant permission to reproduce this telling image or even respond to my query after I supplied the requested chapter and outline. This act of censorship exemplifies the barriers some choose to erect in order to veil the history of unconscionable medical research with blacks. Betsy's voice has been silenced by history, but as one reads Sims' biographers and his own memoirs, a haughty, self-absorbed researcher emerges, a man who bought black women slaves and addicted them to morphine in order to perform dozens of exquisitely painful, distressingly intimate vaginal surgeries. Not until he had experimented with his surgeries on Betsy and her fellow slaves for years did Sims essay to cure white women? Was Sims a savior or a sadist? It depends, I suppose, on the color of the women you ask. Marion Sims epitomizes the two faces, one benign, one malevolent, of American medical research. Quote, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhumane. In 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. spoke those words in Montgomery, Alabama, at the end of the Selma to Montgomery march that had been attended by the black and white physicians of the Medical Committee for Human Rights. King had invited the doctors not only to give medical help to injured marchers, but also to witness the abuse suffered at the hands of segregationists. With these almost unnoticed words, King ushered in a new era in civil rights because, as Delegate to Congress Donna Christensen Christian, MD, chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Health Brain Trust, has declared, health disparities are the civil rights issue of the 21st century. Thus, Dr. King's alarm over racial health injustice was prescient, and were he alive today, his concerns would be redoubled. Mounting evidence of the racial health divide confronts us everywhere we look, from doubled black infant death rates to African American life expectancies that fall years behind whites. Infant mortality of African Americans is twice that of whites. The book, Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Saturday, February 22nd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thom Hartmann here with, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And so Susan Collins now, this is nuts. Susan Collins is saying, this is in response to Lev Parnas's revelations last night. It's, I don't know why, we didn't get this stuff, for the House. I mean, why didn't the House of Representatives do this? It's kind of a little late, isn't it, now here in the Senate? Here's actually what she said. I wonder why the House did not put that into the record, and it's only now being revealed. Doesn't that suggest the House did an incomplete job? No, what happened was the Department of Justice, that's Bill Barr, took possession of Parnas's phones and other materials way back in October when he got arrested, and didn't open an investigation, didn't convene a grand jury, didn't turn it over to anybody. And finally, it was Parnas who said, screw that, I'm going to give this information to the House of Representatives. And then last night to NBC or MSNBC and CNN. Meanwhile, Dan Bongino, who used to be a guest on my old TV show in D.C., he says, why was Marie Yovanovitch monitoring me and others? He's on Fox News a lot now. When we began exposing her role in the Ukrainian collusion scandal with the Obama administration and the Democrats. It's just complete BS. Yovanovitch was not monitoring anybody. So then in response to this last night, Donald Trump Jr. tweets, she was doing the same to me, apparently, and other private citizens. Media won't cover a rogue ambassador monitoring American citizens. I wonder why. Right. But, they're falling apart. I mean, I told you about Susan Collins. Now Martha McSally, Manu Raju, the reporter for CNN, he's just following her down the hall, and he says, what do you think about this information from Lev Parnas? And she says, you're a liberal hack. I'm not talking to you. You're a liberal hack. But I mean, there's some folks who are like seriously concerned about what all this means. I don't know if you caught this, but yesterday Nancy Pelosi, I saw it on TV and I didn't even catch it, and I watched it live. It was, during one of our breaks, and Nancy Pelosi was talking in the House of Representatives, and she's, I think probably like everybody else, she's seen the movie, the Irishman, with this is just an extraordinary movie, and it's based on a book called "Do You Paint Houses?" or "The House Painter" or something like that. And a house painter is a reference to a hitman because when they shoot you at close range, your blood sprays all over the wall. So listen to what Nancy Pelosi had to say yesterday on the floor of the House.
The President of the United States, in using appropriated funds enacted in a bipartisan way by this Congress, funds that were meant to help the Ukraine fight the Russians. The President considered that his private ATM machine, I guess, and said he could say to the President, he could do me a favor. Do me a favor. Do you paint houses too? What is this?
Whoa.
Do me a favor.
Do you paint houses too? What is this? Do me a favor. I mean, she's nailed it. Right. Is that what conservative means now? Mobbed up? It's starting to look that way. So anyhow, just real quickly, some of the things that we learned last night that, we sort of knew but didn't really know. Lev Parnas says, well, actually, first, here's what President Trump said to the president of Ukraine. He said, whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great. I'll have Mr. Giuliani give you a call, and I'm also going to have Attorney General Barr call. And then at the end of the meeting, he says, I'll tell Rudy and Attorney General Barr to call you. Parnas says Barr had to have known everything. I mean, it's impossible that he didn't. Attorney General Barr was basically on the team. The team, of course, means Victoria Tenzing and Joe DeGeneva and Sondland and all these other guys. Parnas said that Devin Nunes was in the middle of this. Parnas said he met several times with Devin Nunes. He said, I was in shock when I was watching the hearings, and when I saw Devin Nunes sitting up there, I texted my attorney. I said, I can't believe this is happening. And Rachel says, why were you so surprised? He says, because they were involved in getting all this stuff on Biden. It's hard to see them lie like that. It's scary because, he was sitting there and making all these statements and all that when he knows very well. And he knew very well that he knew what was going on. He knew what's happening. He knows who I am. And then Mike Pence, his trip to Zelensky's inauguration. It was canceled because Zelensky refused to mention the Bidens in a press release. And, Lev Parnas says, it was 100%. 100%. Pence's trip was canceled because Zelensky wouldn't play along. He says Pence was aware of a quid pro quo. Everybody was in the loop. And that's a phrase, by the way, that was used by Gordon Sondland as well. And then, Trump says, well, I don't know who this guy is. He told reporters, I don't recognize these guys. And Parnas says he was aware of all my movements. He lied. President Trump knew exactly what was going on. I wouldn't do anything without the consent of Rudy Giuliani or the president. I have no intent. I have no reason to speak to any of these officials. And he's saying, basically, why would the president of Ukraine have his people meet with me unless it was because the president of the United States authorized it or asked for it? He also said that it wasn't just the military aid that was on the line. It was all aid to Ukraine. They were squeezing the president of Ukraine really, really hard. Parnas goes on to say he lied, Trump. He knew exactly who we were. He knew exactly who I was, especially. I had a lot of one-on-one conversations with him at gatherings. He says, whenever Trump talks about corruption, he says what it's really all about is the Bidens. It was never about corruption. So it was never about corruption. Interesting. If you dig into Mike Pence's visit, where he went over to on September 1st to meet with Zelensky in Warsaw, Poland, on the commemoration of the 80th anniversary of World War II, he was asked a question by a reporter, an explicit, specific question. This reporter says to him, Can you assure Ukraine that the holdup of that money has absolutely nothing to do with the efforts, including by Rudy Giuliani, to try to dig up dirt on the Biden family? That was the question the reporter asked him in public in Poland. And this is what Mike Pence said. In part, there's some prefatory stuff. He said, as President Trump had me make clear, now keep in mind, Parnas just said, whenever you use the word corruption, what you're talking about is the Bidens. And Pence knows this. As President Trump had me make clear, we have great concerns about issues of corruption. And fortunately, President Zelensky was elected decisively. This is Mike Pence speaking, the vice president. Fortunately, President Zelensky was elected decisively on an anti-corruption message. And he and I discussed yesterday that he's assembled his cabinet. And as his parliament has convened, that even in the early days, he informed me, there have been more than 250 bills that address the issue of public corruption and really restoring integrity to the public process. I mean, to invest additional taxpayer, presumably money, he dropped a word there, in Ukraine, the president wants to be assured that those resources are truly making their way to the kind of investments that will contribute to security and stability in Ukraine. And that's an expectation the American people have, and the president has expressed very clearly. Now, keep in mind, once again, the question was, where'd it go? Last page here. Hang on. Can you assure Ukraine that the holdup of that money had absolutely nothing to do with the efforts by Rudy Giuliani to dig up dirt on the Biden family? He has never said anything about that. And then at the very end of Pence's comments, he says, and I told him, that's Zelensky, that I would carry back to President Trump the progress that he and his administration in Ukraine are making on dealing with corruption in their country. And of course, again, corruption means Biden. So are we seeing a brand new redefinition of the word conservative? Does it mean now not just racist and misogynist and fundamentalist, anti-abortion, and of course the corporatist and the billionaires, but does it also mean mobbed up, in bed with the mob, willing to kill people? I mean, is that what it means now? It's amazing. Johnny in Galveston, Texas. Hey, Johnny, want to weigh in?
Hey, Tom, yeah. You opened your program with asking the question, I believe. You were asking folks, when did conservatives stop being conservative? Is that correct?
Well, no, I was asserting that it happened in the late 70s, and because of these two Supreme Court decisions in 76 and 78 that basically decriminalized political bribery. As a result of that, massive amounts of money started flowing into the Republican Party in 79 and 80, which led to the Reagan Revolution. That was the turning point for the GOP. There was a turning point for the Democratic Party, too, in 92. It wasn't quite as bad. It wasn't quite as dramatic. But, this is how these two Supreme Court decisions and then the subsequent ones, Citizens United, et cetera, have corrupted politics in the United States.
Okay, well, I've got a memory that goes back earlier that's going to be maybe depressing to you. Are you ready?
Sure, go for it.
I was a grade school student still in the early 1970s, and I have a distinct memory. I think I was maybe 13 or 14 years old, and I was on Myrtle Avenue in Queens listening to the radio, probably AM radio because my FM radio was at the house. So this was talk radio. Yeah, they had talk radio back then.
Sure.
And
actually, I had liberal talk radio back then. I don't remember the conversation
exactly, but the only memory I have is feeling very depressed and angry that I was hearing very hateful rhetoric on the radio against liberals and or Democrats in regards to what then was our first oil embargo from OPEC.
Okay.
So that's when I first became aware of hate from what we would call now the right, or neocons.
Yeah. What, you mean racialized, referring to Arabs and things like that? Is that what you're talking about?
No, against liberals. It was hateful talk against liberals, even more so than all the kind of stuff, the generational stuff about hippies don't know this and they're lazy and this and that. This was the first time I became consciously aware that the Republican Party seemed to be very much more out in the open against liberals.
Yeah, well, that was Nixon, too. I mean, that actually...
from there on.
Yeah, it goes back a ways. There's John Ehrlichman's famous statement that, you want to know what the drug war was all about? We had two enemies enemies in the Nixon White House, hippies and blacks, and we couldn't criminalize being a hippie or being black, so we criminalized the drugs they used. I mean, that was it.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Good one, Johnny. We'll be right back. It's 47 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Janet in Kathleen, Georgia. Hey, Janet, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Tom, I wanted you to mention to all of your listeners out there that the Senate is severely limiting media access to the impeachment trial.
Oh, yeah, I did a long rant about that yesterday.
Yes, I wanted to ask that everyone contact either their own senator. They can call the Capitol switchboard, 202-224-3121, or they can call Mitch McConnell's office directly, 202-224-2541.
Go ahead. I doubt calling Mitch McConnell's office will, you're welcome. I doubt calling Mitch McConnell's office will have much impact, but calling other senators, particularly Republican senators, actually might have some impact. So go for it. Amen. Thank you. Michael in Denver, Colorado. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. Reason I'm calling, great subject you're talking about right now. I just want to go back a little bit here. What I said was the Republican Party, I'm going to go back to Joe McCarthy, has had so many black marks against it for the things that they have done. Basically to take the country from what I'd like to say, we were middle of the road for such a long time and we were doing such a great job and all, with all the imperfections that democracy has, we were doing a great job and the world was looking and saying, these guys actually, they know what they're doing in the United States, not to say nothing's perfect. But McCarthy, okay. Afterwards, Nixon with talking to the North Vietnamese in Paris at the Paris conference. Don't worry. Once we get in, we're going to end the war, and you guys will, we'll bury the hatchet. Let's put it that way. Everything that's come along, Iran-Contra. Okay, all of the financial finagling that's been going on in the stock market, that's been fueled by fiscal conservatism and the Republican Party. It is a criminal it's been a criminal organization for a very, very long time. Go back.
Well, now they're actually snuggling up to actual professional criminals.
Yes, and being from Brooklyn and knowing the mafia real well, I've been telling people, I'm 71 years old. I was reading in the newspaper, in the Daily News, back in the 60s about the Trumps. And they would get out of limousines, and who was getting out of the limousines with them? One of the five families. One of the Dons or the Capos from the
Roy Cohn, who was Donald Trump's fixer and right-hand man, was the head lawyer for the Gambino crime family in New York, the biggest mob family in the country. His two biggest clients were the Gambinos and Trump.
Yeah, and now the Italian mafia, Tom, they're a little ticked off at Dono because now he's a friend of the Russian mafia in New York and in the world.
Yeah.
So that's what we have, Tom. And I have to say, I have fiscal conservatives in my family and all. And what I will say is they like to shirk paying taxes. They don't want to participate in America.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Michael,
Tom.
Thank you for the call. Very well said. We'll be back. It's 51 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Zach in North Hollywood, California. Hey, Zach, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. The meaning of the word conservative, I think the modern meaning has to be compared to the word freedom in the two different ways it's understood. They think freedom means the freedom to do anything you want, no matter who it harms or what condition it leaves the environment in.
Particularly if you're making money.
Make a healthy profit.
Yeah, particularly if you're making money. Oh, you were going to say, as long as you make a healthy profit. Zach, we're thinking alike.
Now, the original meaning of the word freedom, to me, meant freedom from kings.
Yeah.
Freedom from the kingdom.
Yep.
And here we are, but very tricky, because don't forget, this freedom that the Constitution gives us also gives us the freedom to harm ourselves. So be careful of the document that gives you that freedom from kings, and honor and protect what it really stands for. And there has to be a large measure of unity, not division.
Yeah, I am completely with you. And in fact, let me just see if I can easily and quickly find this, because Franklin Roosevelt talked about this, and that would be under R, wouldn't it, for Roosevelt, not F for Franklin. And you know, he laid this out. He said that very word freedom. Here we go, 122 to 128. I'm looking at my book Screwed, which has pretty much his entire speech here. He says that very word freedom in itself and of necessity suggests freedom from some restraining power. In 1776, we sought freedom from the tyranny of political autocracy, from the 18th century royalists who held special privileges from the crown. And then he goes on through that. And then he says, it was to win freedom from the tyranny of political autocracy that the American Revolution was won. And he talks about that a little bit. And then he says, since that struggle, however, man's inventive genius releases new forces in our land which have reordered the lives of our people. The age of machinery, of railroads, of steam and electricity, he goes on, these all brought a new problem with them for those who sought to remain free. For out of this modern civilization, economic royalists carved new dynasties. New kingdoms were built upon concentration of control over material things. Through new uses of corporations, banks, and securities, new machinery of industry and agriculture, of labor and capital, all undreamed of by the founders. The whole structure of modern life was impressed into this royal service. And then he goes on, he says, it was natural and perhaps human that the privileged princes of these new economic dynasties, thirsting for power, reached out for control over government itself. They created a new despotism and wrapped it in the robes of legal sanction. In its service, new mercenaries sought to regiment the people, their labor, and their property. And as a result, the average man once more confronts the problem that faced the Minuteman. I mean, that's Franklin Roosevelt, and he's like...
Brilliant, yeah. Tom, can I leave you with a bumper sticker?
Sure.
The Green New Deal or the old corrupt deal?
Yeah, there you
go. Mark.
Okay, I'm with you. Thank you very much. Appreciate the call. Let's see here. Corky in Rochester, New York. Hey, Corky, what's on your mind?
Oh, Tom, yeah, I had that answer for you about the conservatives and the liberals.
Mm-hmm.
The conservatives believe you don't deserve nothing. You got to pull yourself up by the bootstraps.
Right, and that assumes you have bootstraps, that you were born into a family that has bootstraps, right?
Yeah, and the liberals are saying, hey, this country is all of ours. It should serve all of us.
Yeah.
Not your big tax breaks, like that $1.5 trillion they got back in, what was it?
2 years ago,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, how can you give $1.5 trillion to the already wealthy and leave the middle class with absolutely nothing?
Yeah.
Well, and the people are not up in arms about this. It's driving me nuts.
Yeah. I think that Americans get it. And I think that we saw the early indicator of that in the 2018 election when the Democrats took back the House of Representatives. And can you imagine, by the way, if Nancy Pelosi wasn't Speaker, if the Democrats hadn't taken back the House and Republicans still controlled the House of Representatives, we would know none of this. Right? All of these crimes committed by Donald Trump, by Mike Pence, by Bill Barr, by Mike Pompeo, all of these crimes would be buried. They'd be 6 feet underground. We would never know any of it. I mean, it's really remarkable. And I think that 2020 is going to be an even bigger sweep. But that said, don't count out. You've got foreign governments able to hack our voting systems. You've got, Facebook welcoming lies. You've got, it's going to be a tough campaign season. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Medical Apartheid, the dark history of medical experimentation on black Americans from colonial times to the present, by Harriet A. Washington. This is from the introduction. On a sylvan stretch of New York's patrician Upper Fifth Avenue, just across from the New York Academy of Medicine, a colossus in marble, august inscriptions, and a bas-relief caduceus grace a memorial bordering Central Park. These laurels venerate the surgeon James Marion Sims, MD, as a selfless benefactor of women. Nor is this the only statuary erected in honor of Dr. Sims. Marble monuments to his skill, benevolence, and humanity guard his native South Carolina State House, its medical school, the Alabama Capitol grounds, and a French hospital. In the mid-19th century, Dr. Sims dedicated his career to the care and cure of women's disorders and opened the nation's first hospital for women in New York City. He attended French royalty. His Grecian visage inspired oil portraits, and in 1875 he was elected president of the American Medical Association. Hospitals still bear his name, including a West African hospital that utilizes the eponymous gynecological instruments that he first invented for surgeries upon black female slaves in the 1840s. But this benevolent image vies with the detached Marion Sims portrayed in Robert Thom's J. Marion Sims, Gynecological Surgeon, an oil representation of an experimental surgery upon his powerless slave, Betsy. Sims stands aloof, arms folded, one hand holding a metroscope, the forerunner of the speculum, as he regards the kneeling woman in a coolly evaluative medical gaze. His tie and morning coat contrast with her simple servant's dress, head rag, and bare feet. The painting, commissioned and distributed by the Park Davis Pharmaceutical House more than a century after the surgeries, as one of its History and Medicine in Pictures series, takes telling liberties with the historical facts. Thom portrays Betsy as a fully clothed, calm slave woman who kneels complacently on a small table, hand modestly raised to her breast before a trio of white male physicians. Two other slave women peer around a sheet, apparently hung for modesty's sake, in a childlike display of curiosity. This innocuous tableau could hardly differ more from the gruesome reality in which each surgical scene was a violent struggle between the slaves and physicians, and each woman's body was a bloodied battleground. Each naked, unanesthetized slave woman had to be forcibly restrained by the other physicians through her shrieks of agony as Sims determinedly sliced, then sutured her genitalia. The other doctors who could fled when they could bear the horrific screams no longer. It then fell to the women to restrain one another. I wanted to reproduce Thom's painting on the cover of this book, or at least in the text, but when I asked permission of its copyright holder, Pfizer Incorporated, the company insisted on reviewing the entire manuscript of this book before making a decision. As an independent scholar, I could not acquiesce to this, and I used another cover image. When I renewed my request to use the image within the text, Pfizer agreed to base its decision upon reading this chapter and an outline of the book. The Pfizer executives apparently were uncomfortable with what they read because they refused to grant permission to reproduce this telling image or even respond to my query after I supplied the requested chapter and outline. This act of censorship exemplifies the barriers some choose to erect in order to veil the history of unconscionable medical research with blacks. Betsy's voice has been silenced by history, but as one reads Sims' biographers and his own memoirs, a haughty, self-absorbed researcher emerges, a man who bought black women slaves and addicted them to morphine in order to perform dozens of exquisitely painful, distressingly intimate vaginal surgeries. Not until he had experimented with his surgeries on Betsy and her fellow slaves for years did Sims essay to cure white women. Was Sims a savior or a sadist? It depends, I suppose, on the color of the women you ask. Marion Sims epitomizes the two faces, one benign, one malevolent, of American medical research. Quote, "Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhumane." In 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. spoke those words in Montgomery, Alabama, at the end of the Selma to Montgomery march that had been attended by the black and white physicians of the Medical Committee for Human Rights. King had invited the doctors not only to give medical help to injured marchers, but also to witness the abuse suffered at the hands of segregationists. With these almost unnoticed words, King ushered in a new era in civil rights because, as Delegate to Congress Donna Christensen Christian, MD, chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Health Brain Trust, has declared, health disparities are the civil rights issue of the 21st century. Thus, Dr. King's alarm over racial health injustice was prescient, and were he alive today, his concerns would be redoubled. Mounting evidence of the racial health divide confronts us everywhere we look, from doubled black infant death rates to African-American life expectancies that fall years behind whites. Infant mortality of African Americans is twice that of whites. The book, Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Saturday, February 22nd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Professor Richard Wolff, the co-founder of Democracy, of, where did this go? Here it is. Democracy at Work. democracyatwork.info. Thank you. And rdwolff.com with 2 F's is his other website. And you can tweet him at Prof. Wolff or democracy at WRK. Professor Wolff, welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And I should say you're an economist and also the author of numerous books, including Understanding Marxism and your latest Understanding Socialism, which is just brilliant. So, I had somebody called into the show last week and said, when the Fed engages participates in the repo market, the overnight repurchase market, they're literally throwing into this market billions of dollars, or perhaps even fractions of trillions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars. And where does that money come from, and does it get repaid And how does it interact with the banks themselves? Does that money in some way add to banks' profitability or not? And you know, how does all that work? And then also, you know, I in the Axios newsletter this morning, in fact, they were talking about how the Dallas Fed president, Robert Kaplan, yesterday in public remarks said that he felt that the Fed's actions at injecting all this money into the economy, or at least into the banking system, and also at keeping low interest rates, what some would call artificially low, that they're basically goosing the stock market and other asset prices, which presumably would mean, you know, like gold and oil and things like that. And I wanted to talk with you about that too. So let's start out with, you know, where does the Fed's money come from? How does it flow? Who makes money off it? What does it all mean?
Okay. The Federal Reserve is the peculiar name for the American Central Bank. In other countries, it's called, you know, the Bank of England, the Bank of France, and things like that. It's historical why we don't call it the Bank of the U.S., so we changed it because we had some troubles in the 19th century with that bank, and so we called it in 1913 when it got going here over 100 years ago. We called it the Federal Reserve. But the basic responsibility of the Federal Reserve is two things: to control the quantity of money in circulation on the one hand, and to do it in such a way as to, quote, maintain price stability. That is a nice way of saying try to avoid either an inflation when prices zoom up or a deflation when prices zoom down. The Federal Reserve, therefore, is given an incredible amount of power because, in effect, it decides how much money there is. It doesn't do that by itself because in our system we permit private banks to likewise create money by literally saying to a potential borrower of money, the way we'll do it is we will establish an account for you. We will tell you that it now has $15 million in it, and you can begin to spend by writing checks. And that's simply a keystroke on a computer that a bank is allowed to do. There are regulations and so on governing it, but in effect, the Federal Reserve either pumps money in by lending money to the banks or by buying from the banks the treasury securities that the banks previously bought from the government. There's a variety of ways of doing it, but the bottom line, because it's not worth getting caught in the weeds, is that the Federal Reserve has the option to increase or decrease the quantity of money in circulation in cooperation with banks. What that repo market problem was over the last several months, it was a little bit like, and I mean this parallel, with the subprime mortgage crisis back in 2007. It's a scary development. Suddenly, interest rates in this specialized credit market called the repo market spiked up, and the Federal Reserve got scared that rising interest rates would hamper borrowing and thereby undercut the economy. Mr. Trump got even more worried about it because a downdraft in the economy would be deadly for his reelection effort. And between those two phenomena, they started pumping money into the repo market. But markets are all linked. If you pump in money in one place, that money can quickly move from one market to another. And this is how we'll answer your second question. It could, of course, happen, and that would be the fantasy of the economists that run our society, that pumping extra money in will lead that money to be put in the hands of individuals who will buy more goods and services, companies that will produce more goods and services, and thereby jobs will go up and the economy will prosper. That didn't happen, and for a simple reason. Over the last 40 years, the purchasing power of this country has been withdrawn from middle income and poor people and concentrated in the hands of the rich. But the rich are a very small minority, and they do not buy in the way that the mass majority of our people would. So there is, in effect, no incentive for that money to go into producing goods and services to be blunt, because Americans in the majority cannot afford to buy them. So where does the extra money go? Into the stock market. That becomes the place to use the money. You buy shares. Everybody else is using the new money to buy shares. So the shares go up, which only incentivizes the next batch of new money from the Fed to go into the stock market to cash in. And you've seen it particularly in the last 2 weeks, but you've seen it before. Extra money produces an inflation, not in the goods and services market, because that's not where the money is going, but in the stock market. And for the top 5% of the American people, that looks like wealth and riches going up. They're happy. They will donate to the political forces that keep this going, and the rest of us will be spectators on a deepening inequality.
Now, there are some countries that have had very low interest rates and this kind of intervention by their federal bank for decades. Are there not? Japan, for example?
Absolutely, and they have the highest amount of government debt and private debt in the world. I mean, they're way ahead of the United States. That creates all kinds of difficulties. Look, I mean, the level of debt that is being created, because this money coming in is so cheap with these low interest rates and is so plentiful, that basically what you have said as the monetary authority, and you've said this to the government, you've said it to corporations, and you've even said it to working class families. Whatever economic problem you have, here's the solution. Historically unprecedented quantities of money at next to no interest rate. So what we have is an economy which for 10 years now has loaded up on debt in a way we have never seen before, so that the next economic downturn, and we're overdue to have one, is going to be very dangerous, because each industry, each company, each government that goes down and can't pay is going to take all the creditors that it has borrowed from down with it. I mean, I noted just a week ago, Tom, that the company I grew up with, drinking the milk, Borden, an old company in this country, went bankrupt, and the CEO made a statement in answer to the question, why are you bankrupt? And his answer was, too much debt. Now, he said it as if debt were poured on him by some mysterious force rather than being something he entered into a contract to acquire. But the bottom line is, any downturn that any company gets, and even worse, an economy, will now be ramified by all these debts.
Now, a couple of years ago, I read a book about the 20s and 30s, kind of an economic history of the country. And one of the points that they made was that there was massive, widespread debt in New York around the stock market in the 1920s, that people were allowed to buy stocks on what were called margin buys, where they would put down 5 or 10% of the value of the stock or the price of the stock, and the bank would loan them the money to buy the stock. And that was largely regarded to be one of the things that led to the crash. Is that the same sort of thing that we're seeing right now? You said, these levels of debt are unprecedented.
Absolutely. We're seeing every kind of debt go crazy. And of course, if the stock markets go up the way they have, for example, in the last couple of weeks particularly, then it becomes unbelievable what you can do. You can borrow, you put down 10 or 20% of the value of a stock, and then you borrow the rest at a very low interest rate. And if the stock goes up a few percentage points, you sell it, repay the loan, and virtually walk away with a paper profit, which then induces everybody else who's aware of what you're doing to do the same thing. And that's the recipe for spiraling out of control, the way it did in the 1920s and 30s. Lots of the so-called lessons that we were supposed to have learned from the crash, like the one you just mentioned, were then eviscerated in the 30 or 40 years since. And the best example is the Glass-Steagall Act that said we should make an impenetrable wall between commercial banking and investment banking. They evaded it for 20 years, then they weakened it, and finally, under Bill Clinton, the Congress voted to repeal it, and now we're back in the same mess that we were back then, because we allowed the reforms after the Great Depression to be undone, and now we're facing the consequences.
Now, if Japan and some European countries have been able to keep this little Ponzi scheme going for years or for even a generation, why can't we?
Because they operate with much more control. They do not permit the private sector, neither the banking sector nor the non-financial, non-banking sector, to operate with the level of freedom from regulation, freedom from accountability that is the hallmark of the United States, primarily, and of Great Britain, secondarily. And so you get, in some cases, you get growth spurts because they're not held back by social responsibility. But unfortunately, the other side of that same coin is that they're free to engage in the activity that threatens us all.
Remarkable. Thank you so much, Professor Richard Wolff. Great talking with you. His most recent book, Understanding Socialism, democracyatwork.info, and rdwolff with 2fs.com. Thank you, Dr. Wolff.
My pleasure.
We'll be back with more of the news of, what's going on, the impeachment articles just read on the floor of the Senate. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And, of course, there's Nancy Pelosi's question of Donald Trump. Do you paint houses? And welcome back. Well, let's see here. Marsh in Stockton, California. Hey, Marsh, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hey, how's it going? I'm actually calling from Hawaii over at Fissure 8. This is place I moved to the day before Trump was elected. My symbolic goodbye to the mainland.
Okay, where in Hawaii are you? What's the name of the town?
It's Poa, Hawaii. It's out by Fissure 8, the last little outburst we had.
Okay.
I wanted to offer you the objective and technical definition of conservatism.
Okay.
This kind of defies all the subjective changes that humanity applies to it over the years. So it's a little bit technical, and I'll try to keep it quick. To conserve is to retain, but to whom? But the individual. Thus, it's subjective in nature. To conserve is to retain to the preferred likeness of the individual self, and this is how we know that individualist versus conservatism. It's often confused with preservation, but to preserve means to retain to an original state, which makes it objective. So conservation is not preservation, and it's often...
Yeah, this is, Marsh, this is gibberish. Respectfully.
If you please take your time, I actually really respect a lot of your work, and I've been a long-time listener. I speak to objective political theory, which emulates physics. It's not the id entity politics. That's based on right-wing linguistic eugenics. So I implore you to please review this, and okay, have a good day.
Okay. Thank you, Marsh. Appreciate the call. Chaz in Lakewood, Washington. Hey, Chaz, what's up?
Nazadrovia, comrade, is another glorious day in Trumpistan, is it not?
Indeed it is, Chaz. What's on your mind?
Hey, you're railing on conservatives, and I'd like to pitch in. Let me give you my list. It'll take, I think, less than a minute.
Go for it.
Conservatives are pro-Israel but anti-Semite. Conservatives are pro-life up until the second you're alive. Pro-life unless you live in Flint, Michigan. Pro-military but keep closing bases. They love the Affordable Care Act but hate Obamacare. They cut welfare to the poor, which is only $7 out of their pay, but shovel welfare to corporations, which is $4,000. They want banks too big to fail, but government small enough to drown in a bathtub. They claim to be for family values, but consume more porn than any other region. They're anti-LGBTQ up until the moment they're busted in a public restroom. Listen, conservatives love America but hate Americans. By the time cons accuse others of something, cons have been doing it for years. Am I right?
I think so. I think that's a pretty good start. I mean, I was trying to look at the kind of historical use of the word and the historical behavior of Republicans and the Republican Party. And there was just this huge shift in behavior of Republicans starting in the mid-'70s. And I think it was the result of these two Supreme Court decisions. In fact, I think I can build that case very strongly. But they have been working with language ever since. And now they're saying, oh, no, we're just about small government and, we're just about fiscal responsibility. They use these nice words. I mean, who doesn't want to be fiscally responsible, and who wants, jackbooted thugs, running around with a big government?
That is a discussion for another day. And if the Republicans can survive Trump, I got a feeling they're going to have to do some adjustment.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. I mean, what Trump has done is he's taken the mask off the Republican Party. He said, here's what's really going on. And he started it in the primary. He called them all out, all those Republicans on stage, He just, and I think that was one of the things that actually caused some people to vote for him, was he was willing to call out Republicans. Chaz, thanks a lot for the call. It's good to hear from you. 22 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. So a little bit more in the news department, and then we'll get to your phone calls here. Devin Nunes, of course, has sued numerous people for speaking ill of him, and including a fictitious cow and his fictitious mother. These are Twitter accounts. And Ted Lieu went after Devin Nunes. And apparently this was a few weeks ago, and basically suggested that Devin Nunes had something to do with Lev Parnas. In response, all of a sudden, Ted Lieu stopped talking about Devin Parnas. About Lev Parnas, excuse me. Or Devin Nunes. So why did Ted Lieu stop talking about Devin Nunes? Well, here it comes. After the Parnas interview last night, Ted Lieu tweeted, "Amazing Lev Parnas interview on Maddow. Also, I'm disclosing that the lawyer for Devin Nunes wrote a letter saying Representative Nunes will sue me if I didn't apologize for saying last month that Nunes conspired with Parnas. Devin, I'm adding to my statement, your pants are on fire." Right. So, I don't know. We'll see where that goes. Meanwhile, the latest outrage that Republicans are all freaked out about, they're doing, like segments about this, apparently on Fox News and on right-wing talk radio, is that Nancy Pelosi, when she signed the articles of impeachment yesterday in that ceremony where they took them over to the Senate, she used too many pens. She signed her name, but she did it like one stroke at a time, and for each stroke she used a different pen. And then she passed those pens out, and they all had her name engraved on them. I mean, they had special pens made for this signing ceremony. These, beautiful Nancy Pelosi fountain pens. They will be keepsakes. And she handed them out to the people who are on the impeachment staff. I don't know what the magic word is for them, but, the folks, the impeachment managers, who are going to be managing the impeachment as it goes into the United States Senate. So fascinating stuff. Another thing that I think is worth noting is that Parnas is, and I didn't see, maybe I missed it, but I don't think so. I didn't see very much anyway of Rachel Maddow delving into this last night, is that the Parnas document dump included notes that referenced Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, our old friend Dan Bongino, and others as participants in the campaign to smear Marie Yovanovitch, who, by the way, through her lawyer Lawrence Robbins, has now called for an investigation into this guy Hyde, this wannabe Republican lobbyist, and now he wants to be a member of Congress. The guy who the police dragged him out of a Trump property in Florida, I think it was the Doral, back in last May, I believe it was. It was right after he was tweeting to Parnas that he had people in Ukraine following Yovanovitch around and implying that he could get them to take her out somehow. He never said, kill her or physically harm her or intimidate her or whatever. But anyhow, she's asked for an investigation. She said, her lawyer said, we trust that the appropriate authorities will conduct an investigation to determine what happened. And sure enough, if Bill Barr is refusing to look into this, we don't know. The Justice Department hasn't said a word. But the government of Ukraine is looking into it. Yep, the government of Ukraine. Mr. Zelensky has finally announced an investigation. And no, it's not into the Bidens. It's into whether this Republican, Mr. Hyde, was actually following, or had Ukrainians actually following, Ambassador Yovanovitch. It's getting weird.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So what does it mean to be a Republican and a conservative today in America? How do we define that? What do these people believe? Take your calls right after this.
Want to connect with the show online?
We're reading today from Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amax, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980, because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. The This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum Number 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so the South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Saturday, February 22nd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series, after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Back. Your thoughts on all this? I've, been laying out. Oh, by the way, I mentioned that Robert Hyde, I didn't know if Bill Barr was investigating Robert Hyde, the guy who basically was tweeting to Lev Parnas that he had agents in Ukraine following Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch around. And turns out that the FBI invaded his offices either last night or this morning. The news is just breaking this morning. The FBI is apparently taking this seriously and looking into it. So, interesting. Rick in Denver. Hey, Rick, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Hey, we all know about the famous Fifth Avenue I can shoot somebody quote. What I think that is missing that people don't really notice enough is that not only could he shoot somebody, but he makes everybody else around him shoot the body so that they're culpable in the murder. So that's why Pence is involved. And if you don't think he went into the Republican
Rick?
Weeks ago and he's gone.
Uh-huh.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you faded out there for a minute. Try it again.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying that if Trump did...
Oh, Rick, I'm sorry. Your cell service is coming and going, and I completely lost you there again. But yeah, I'm with you. The thing that I'm wondering is when Trump said I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and people would still vote for me. Did he mean, and this is the popular understanding of what he said, that he meant, I could commit a crime in plain daylight and people would forgive me the crime because they like me in so many other ways. I mean, that's how everybody's been interpreting it. My question is, did he mean actually that he had the ability to kill people or have people killed? Which takes us back to Nancy Pelosi asking him if he paints houses. Alan in DeKalb, Illinois. Hey, Alan, or DeKalb. Hey, Alan, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I just wanted to give you another definition of conservative.
Okay, go for it.
Through a lifetime of observation, I think that the definition of conservative means conserving all the wealth and power into the hands of a very few elite.
Yes.
And you can do this by institutions such as theocracy, dictatorship, monarchy, oligarchy, or even slavery. But one thing they all have in common is they all conserve wealth and power into the hands of a very few.
And there were people at the time of the American Revolution, Sir Edmund Burke is probably the most famous, who called themselves, and in fact, Russell Kirk, his book, The Conservative Mind, published in 1953, opens with an entire chapter about Burke. You could argue, well, actually, Burke came right out and said he had called himself a conservative. I mean, these Tories and high Federalists and whatnot, that was the definition of conservative back then, although it wrapped into it was a belief in royalty or theocracy, one or the other, that, as Hobbes famously said in Leviathan, without the constraining power of church or state, society will basically disintegrate. It was authoritarianism combined with seizing basically all the assets. Everything is not nailed down. Yeah, well done, Alan. I like that. That's a good, solid definition. Thanks a lot for the call. Matt in Milwaukee. Hey, Matt, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for taking my call, Tom. I don't know why they're not talking about it on the news, and it's kind of bothering me. That I don't think that he just wanted to have announced an investigation. That obviously would help him politically, help Trump, bring down Biden and everything. But after that, then what? Why did he need his Attorney General, Giuliani, his ambassador, and Rick Perry, and all these people just for that? I don't think it was just that. I think that he wanted to get text messages. I think he wanted to get emails, stuff that he couldn't get by warrant here when they're over there in Ukraine doing this. Stuff that he might not even be able to get over here because he needs a FISA warrant. Ever since Edward Snowden told us what the government's collecting, I see great potential on what Trump's thinking he could do to people. And it's frightening. I mean, the pictures they could get. What if Hunter Biden wanted to send a dick pic to his girl, and they could grab that? You know what I'm saying?
Okay. Apropos of your question, though, I think it's an important question, and this is the one that Gordon Sondland brought up. I'm pretty sure he was the one who testified to this before the House of Representatives, who said that, Donald Trump was not actually interested in there being a real investigation of Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and Burisma. What he was interested in was having the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, announce to the world that they were launching an investigation. And if you look at, Hillary Clinton's emails, right? That just got resolved 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago,
yes,
Bill Barr's Department of Justice finally said, there's nothing there. That was 3 years after the election. So what Trump knew from, and probably knew well before 2 weeks ago, was that basically James Comey had taken down Hillary Clinton or had made Donald Trump president simply by announcing an investigation. He didn't have to announce any wrongdoing. That all it took was the smoke. You don't need the fire. And the smoke is easy. The fire is a lot harder.
Yes. If I may, Tom, I agree with you. He wanted the announcement first. But if that didn't take down Biden, and as you know, sometimes you throw some kind of a scandal out there, it brings down the poll numbers, and then eventually they rise again, and it kind of loses its power.
Right.
He could have been gathering the stuff. I mean, of course, if Joe Biden gets knocked out of the primary from that, he doesn't need that anymore. But he was going to need other things. He was going to need the server thing. I really think they were going to manufacture. Do you think they have the capability to manufacture emails? to manufacture a server. Oh, here it is, Democratic server. Look at all this corruption on here. They've got to have computer experts.
No, it makes perfect sense, Matt. And I think that you're probably right, that they were not just looking for the announcement, but anything else that they could get, that they could, put out in dribs and drabs, and particularly whenever the news cycle was going against them, would be of value. But I would go beyond that. I would say I don't think that they needed to get anything. All they needed was to be able to have somebody who is in a position of authority, Bill Barr, for example, to go in front of the microphones and say, like 6 months down the road or 3 months before the election, if Biden's the nominee, and say, well, we've got a new lead here. We're now looking into whether or not, Joe Biden was throwing puppies out of second-floor windows in downtown Ukraine, and his son Hunter was, dropping them out of fifth-floor windows. And, they would come up with something. So I think we're both right on this. But anyhow, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. George in Chicago. Hey, George, what's on your mind?
Thanks for taking my call, Tom.
Sure.
To piggyback briefly on what you were just talking about, Malcolm Nance has said in the last couple of days that one of the objects of hacking emails and into other people's computers is to get a whole long stream of data or individual messages, and then your experts will get a sense of the style and the format of the people they're hacking, and then they can insert fake material here and there where they think it'll do the most damage, and then release it. And without professional analysis, the average person won't be able to tell what's real and what isn't.
That's a good point.
Yeah, but as far as how to define a conservative, I believe there was a Supreme Court justice who once opined that your right to swing your fist ends where the other fellow's nose begins. Mm-hmm. And it's been my experience in life that conservatives believe that their freedom begins where the other fellow's nose ends, and that they're always looking to punch somebody out and almost always to punch somebody down. They rarely punch up. But it's because they're all bullies and they're looking for somebody to beat up all the time.
That certainly has become the posture that the Republican Party has adopted over the last few years. And you see it writ large in the way that Jim Jordan and Devin Nunes and some of these other Doug Collins were behaving in the House impeachment inquiries. It was very much bully-like behavior. Spot on, George. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in the Senate. And what's going to be particularly interesting is how much of the Senate deliberations and discussions we don't get to hear under these new rules from Mitch McConnell that basically put everything on the QT.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Mitch McConnell is going to bury this thing as deep as he possibly can. The question is, how deep is that? We'll be back. And welcome back, Russ in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Russ, what's on your mind?
Yeah, Tom, I'm glad you brought this up because I've had a little bone to pick with you for a long time. I think when you call these people like, say, Charles Koch a conservative, you give them a dignity and a probity that they do not deserve. Mr. Koch, as an example, is a radical right-winger and a fascist. I think you've read Nancy McLean's book, Democracy in Chains.
Sure.
He doesn't want to conserve anything.
And Jane Mayer's Dark Money, too, does a deep dive into him,
Yeah. But these people want to completely destroy democracy in this country. That is not conservative, not in the least. They are, as I said, they are radical right-wingers. They are fascists.
I get all that, Russ. But in the context of this discussion, your next door neighbor, or the guy that you work with at work, or your brother-in-law, or whatever, who votes for Trump, who votes Republican, will almost certainly call themselves a conservative. Rush Limbaugh uses the word conservative constantly. You find it all over right-wing radio. These people self-identify as conservatives. And so I think it's really important that we while you may be absolutely right, Charles Koch probably doesn't even refer to himself as a conservative, probably refers to himself as a libertarian. Certainly his brother ran for vice president on the Libertarian ticket in 1980, and they were big funders of the Libertarian Party back in the day. But I think that we need to be able to, when somebody says I'm a conservative, we need to be able to say, what does that mean? And then when they say, oh, well, it means we like small government, you say, oh, you mean, in other words, you want corporations to basically run the game. And they say, oh, it means fiscal responsibility. Then you're able to say, well, what you're actually talking about is that rich people don't have to pay taxes and that the government shouldn't be in the business of running Social Security and Medicare and public education, for that matter. I think that we need to define these terms in a way that the average person can understand. But your point is well taken. Your point is very well taken. Thanks a lot, Russ, for the call. Kevin in Berea, Ohio. Hey, Kevin, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I think for what I notice out here in the Midwest is today, at least, conservatism seems to be conflated among Trump's supporters with just populism. If you are a flag waver, if you say you support the military, if you support law enforcement, if you say you hate socialism or anything close to it, you're a conservative. It isn't about reducing the national deficit. It isn't about promoting a strong middle class. It isn't about protecting fair elections.
Yeah, you're right. These are all the ways that Trump has, and at his rallies, in fact, redefines it. So, but it doesn't. But it's not just supporting the police. I mean, I support the police. I want us to have police, but they want to support cops beating people up. Right?
Exactly.
It's not just supporting the military. It's it's cutting funds to the troops, but giving more money to the military contractors. More money for defense.
Lip service.
Yeah.
To all these things.
Yeah.
It's you mentioned Nancy Pelosi, and it just makes. She has said she fears that Trump won't leave office no matter what the outcome of the election is, and I wonder what happens if that indeed becomes what plays out.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
Time will tell, Kevin. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Scott in Houston, Texas. It says here you want to disagree with me. What's about what?
No, I don't necessarily disagree with you, Tom. I enjoy your program. I happen to be a libertarian. I left the Republican Party years ago when I felt they left me, and I love interacting about politics. I tend to hear a lot of hate on either side, right? If I tune into your program, I hear a lot of hate towards conservatives, and if I turn into conservative, whether it be Hannity or Limbaugh or somebody like that.
What have I said today, Scott, that's hateful?
Well, I think you paint people in a way that they're very hateful, right?
What have I said that was hateful?
You just made a comment about conservatives want to protect the right for police to beat people up.
Yeah, Donald Trump has said that in at least three different rallies where I've seen it.
You just said conservatives. I didn't say Donald Trump. Donald Trump to me is not a conservative.
It was in the context of a conversation about Donald Trump changing the meaning of conservative.
Well,
Scott, I get it that hate is actually a tool that's being used by Trump and some Republicans. I don't think that hate is a tool that's being used by liberals or progressives. You may find that I hate the behavior, not the person. I think you're going to find more on the left. But in a way, we've digressed away from the big topic. What is it about libertarianism? Now, I'm assuming you know that the Libertarian Party was created back in the 1940s by FEE, by this lobbying group on behalf of the housing industry, in order to, and then funded by the Chamber of Commerce and DuPont and General Motors, in order to give a respectable patina to efforts to basically reduce the power of government and government regulation and increase the power of corporations and the very, very rich, which, it does very well. What about libertarianism makes sense to you?
So we could go back to the origins of a lot of different movements, and you can dissect them. What I like about libertarianism, and like I said, I like the fact that there's individual liberties, and I feel like the more we give up to government, the less we get for ourselves as far as our civil liberties go. And whether I want to smoke marijuana or give my taxes over to the government, where they can just spend it in any way they want. They can get it into intervention.
Well, no, they can't spend it any way they want. They can only spend it in ways that are appropriated by Congress that you have a say in electing. But this is, Scott, what you're doing is validating why for years I have been saying that libertarians are Republicans who want to smoke dope and get laid. It's like, yeah, let's legalize prostitution and marijuana, but don't take my taxes to give to somebody on Social Security. Thank you very much.
But once again, you're painting me with a broad brush. But what I would say is what a libertarian is, I don't want to smoke marijuana. I reserve the right for people who want to do it to let them do it. It's their body, their choice, right?
You realize these are liberal positions as well.
And that's why I said, Tom, I like conversation, right? I like to find what we have in common and what we disagree with. And I think a big problem what we have today is you got a lot of people waving a blue flag, and you got a lot of people waving a red flag, and they're just punching the bejesus out of each other. And I'd like to find common ground where we can. But the problem with something I hear a lot with you guys, I know you talk about Citizens United, which I don't necessarily disagree with, and that corporations control everything. And I've been a part of a corporation for 20 years. I've managed a couple different Fortune 500 companies I've been fortunate to be a part of. But if you want to take away Citizens United, you want to take away a business's right to give to a particular politician that may or may not. My corporation, for instance, we have a fund voluntarily that each employee can give to, and then that money is appropriated to people that typically will support things that benefit our company, right?
Right, and this is a violation of federal law from 1907 when the Tillman Act was passed until 2010 with Citizens United.
And I don't disagree with that. And I would say right here, if you would ever consider, say you and I were in charge of everything, I give you Citizens United, we take away the rights for corporations to donate to a particular candidate, and in return, I would ask, hey, let's lower the corporate tax down to zero.
Well, I would say that's really a completely separate conversation. But what I would give you, Scott, is I would say that liberal billionaires and unions shouldn't be able to give money to politicians either. Let's just get all this non-human money out of elections, and let's go back to the law we had before the Buckley decision, which capped individual contributions at a few $100s per year per candidate. Period.
But I would, and I agree with you on that. But I would also venture into the corporate taxes, because corporate taxes are really just taxes on the poor and middle class.
Not true.
That's
what
really
corporate
all
taxes,
they are.
Scott, what corporate taxes do is they allow. No, let me just make this point, and you can rebut it all you want. A corporation is an actual entity. This whole thing about corporate personhood. Yes, corporations as artificial persons have, the right to sue and be sued, the right to enter into contracts, the right to do business, open checking accounts, all those kinds of things. I'm all in favor of all that. I own a corporation. It's this show. That said, corporations also have a footprint on this planet. Right? My corporation here is using the police to protect this building, is using the fire department to protect this building, is using public roads for myself and my employees to get to work, is using the public education system so that my employees come to work knowing how to read and write. As a corporation, I am using the commons. As a corporation, I should pay my fair share of the commons to maintain and sustain the commons that I'm using. I don't see why just because I decided to incorporate, I should get a free ride.
But in your corporation, doesn't that corporate tax get absorbed in the cost of your goods or service?
No. Generally, corporate taxes are not. Typically, what corporate taxes come out of are dividends and high wage earners pay, basically. But
not
running
in
a small corporation
I've ever been in.
Yeah,
not in any corporation I've ever been in. And it typically goes.
No, Scott, this is Econ 101. What determines prices is competition. If you've got one corporation, if you've got two corporations that are both selling milk, and one of them is paying 10% profit or 10% tax because they're very profitable, and the other corporation is paying no tax, those corporations are still going to be competing based on price, not on taxes.
It's not always the price of the goods, it's also labor. Labor will go down. They will eliminate jobs, close factories, go to
corporate
China,
taxes,
go to Mexico.
Scott, the period of time when corporations grew the fastest and became the most prosperous in the United States was the period from 1940 to 1980, when the corporate tax accounted for a third of all federal income.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hello, I'm Casey.
We say fight back!
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough that 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2-to-1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Saturday, February 22nd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the 3rd in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
His pregnant wife was account. The book, The Cult of Trump.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So we were talking earlier about, what does conservative mean anymore? And I would expand that even to ask the question, what does Republican mean anymore. Increasingly, I've been arguing that it means we're in the pockets of big corporations or billionaires who themselves have interests in big corporations, period, full stop. We'll bring along a few racists, and we'll bring along a few fundamentalists, and we'll bring along a few, anti-abortion activists to get enough votes to have political power. But basically what we're all in it for is the money. And I think a classic example of this is what's going on over at the Department of Interior. On the line with us is Jayson O'Neill. He's the Deputy Director of the Western Values Project. WesternValuesProject.org is their website, and you can tweet him at Western_values. Jayson, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks so much for having us, Tom. We're excited to be here and really chat about kind of what we believe is an unprecedented corporate capture, unseen, arguably in American history across this administration. Right. So the secretary is Bernhardt, right, for the Interior Department. I remember James Watt is kind of in the same mold, it seems, back in the day. Yeah, I mean, we've harkened back to kind of the days of the land barons and the oil and gas land barons that are coming in and running really roughshod over our public lands and our environment. Right. So let's start out with who is this guy? Where did he come from? So folks that haven't been following, our Secretary of Interior, now that manages all America's natural resources and public lands and has input on our rivers and water resources, so all myriads of things. Well, here this guy comes from an experience of a lobbyist for the very extractive industry corporations that are now at the trough and seeking major environmental revisions and protections removed from our public lands. We know that David Bernhardt has represented at least 26 corporate entities that have a direct impact on the decisions that are being made at the Department of Interior. So to say that he's the ultimate swamp creature may be putting it lightly. Yeah, it might be an insult to swamp creatures. So, particularly since he's actually in charge of supervising the swamps around the country, at least those that are protected. Let's start with the National Environmental Policy Act. I'm not sure when this was passed. Is this back Nixon era law? This was the first really strong law to protect our national parks and our commons? Yeah, I mean, that is correct. So, this is America's bedrock environmental law, dating back 50 years when Richard Nixon was really in a position almost forced to have to pass it. Remember in those times, that was when rivers were catching on fire. Yeah, the Cuyahoga River, I remember it. It was right down the road from us. There you go. So after 50 years of successes, ensuring that we balance kind of the decisions that we make on major projects and development and extractive development, the Trump administration and really David Bernhardt, the architect of these some 200 pages of revisions, really had decided that after 50 years of success, let's gut it for our corporate pals and our former clients in the case of David Bernhardt. Are they able to do this because typically what legislation does, particularly when it creates an agency or a new policy, is it outlines broad goals, like, we want clean air and decent water, and we want to protect endangered species. But Congress doesn't have the expertise to micromanage that or even to micro-define what that means. And so they give these broad policy objectives, and then it's up to the agency to have their own scientists and their own experts figure out what's the best way to accomplish that goal. And so when somebody comes in who disagrees with the goal and says, well, what's the best way to screw up that goal, they simply have their scientists come up with different policies, and therefore you can have these huge differences in implementation of law from one administration to another because of that. Am I accurately describing that? Yeah, and I think that is some of the uncertainty that has been brought forward by industry and projects on it because it has changed. But what we see now under the Trump administration, though, is actually an agency that really even doesn't acknowledge science, which should be very frightening for the future of our country. And, we even had our appointed acting BLM director, William Penley. For folks that don't know of him, he's had a 30-year history fighting this very law, tell reporters that this was a terrible burden on us, implying that it was a burden for our agency to actually do the work to ensure that the public was protected and our environment was protected and our public health was protected by reviewing and analyzing, a project through the guise of the NEPA law. One thing I think we should maybe start calling it, instead of the National Environmental Protection Act under Trump, maybe it's no environmental protections anymore, because really, when we look at these revisions, and we can go down the top lines, and there's many organizations looking at kind of the minutia of it, but we can drive, corporations now can drive a truck through our environmental laws, which means that we don't have to consider the science. We can pick and choose what a project needs to be reviewed or when it doesn't need to be reviewed. And really, we're just going to be sticking our heads in the sand, ignoring probably the biggest issue that's hanging out over the entire world and the globe is climate emissions and the impacts of global warming. But again, when you put somebody as like a stable genius as Trump in charge, who's also filled his administration with over 280 lobbyists, really this is the outcome. They are working to move the ball forward and remove protections for the American people so corporations can put money in their pockets.
I understand that Secretary David Bernhardt has also, on numerous occasions, hidden meetings with industry lobbyists and industry fat cats on his calendar, or issued conflicting versions of his calendar. This guy knows what he's doing is wrong, right?
Yeah, by all accounts, when you don't release public information, you do things behind closed doors. Really, it shows what the intent is, and going forward from, his days as a mega lobbyist, we know he has at least 5 different versions of calendars. We've been able to go through and identify at least 12 meetings that Secretary Bernhardt or his deputy secretary have had regarding NEPA rollbacks. Furthermore, we've also identified directly 10 clients in which his former clients or the clients of his now most powerful lobby firm in the world, Brownstein and Hyatt, stand to directly benefit from the gutting of America's bedrock environmental law.
This is absolutely insane. Jayson O'Neill, Deputy Director of the Western Values Project. What can we do about this?
Well, first off, I think, sticking with the Trump theme, there's a completely inept 60-day comment period. There is going to be a petition to expand that. There's actually only 2 public meetings regarding 200 pages of some revisions to the NEPA law. There's going to be one in Washington, D.C., and there's going to be one out in Denver, but there's also going to be a petition to actually expand those meetings. But we need to contact and comment and say that we need to protect the lands, the water, our air, and our public health. There's an opportunity for people to comment on federalregister.gov, as well as talk to your elected officials. This is unprecedented. This is unprecedented corporate capture of our federal government, and our elected officials need to stand up to the Trump administration and say, no, public health is more important. Our wildlife is more important. Our clean water is more important. And the future of our country and, quite frankly, our planet is more important than lining the pockets of the 1% and the corporate billionaires who pay nothing back into our system.
And the former lobbying clients of Mr. Bernhardt. It's absolutely amazing. Jayson O'Neill, the Deputy Director of the Western Values Project. WesternValuesProject.org is the website. You can tweet them at Western_values. Jayson, thanks for dropping by.
Thanks, Tom, for having us.
Great talking with you. We'll be back. The Chief Justice of the United States just swore in the senators for the impeachment trial, and they're going up now and signing one at a time basically the sign, I am here and I agree to this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll continue our conversation about what all this means, where it came from, and where it's going to go. I mean, what's the end result of so-called conservatism after this? welcome back. Patrick in Long Island, New York. Hey, Patrick, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? I wanted to comment on the meaning of conservatism. I've spoken to you a few times before, and I mentioned that I grew up in the 60s and 70s. And I remember there being almost like a third-party conservative. And it was different from the Republican. And generally, they were running on, three different issues. And usually it was financial, it was strong military, and strong police. And then, if my memory is correct, Ronald Reagan was the first one who came out and said, I am a conservative, and I'm not going to hide it. Now, Goldwater was the last one I remember prior to Trump, prior to Reagan, saying that flat out he's a conservative.
Right. In fact, he wrote a book called Conscience of a Conservative, and that was used against him.
Yes, correct. And as I see it today, once Reagan came into office and the debt was running, the Republicans abdicated any claim towards fiscal conservatism. And I have yet to see someone come forward and say, except for the Democratic Party, who now are the fiscal conservatives, let's redirect our money in the appropriate way, and let's do what the maximum outcome will be. But as I said, I used to regularly remember seeing a Democrat, Republican, and a conservative candidate, and that you don't see any longer.
Yeah.
That's all, Tom.
Yeah, well, that's a good one. Thanks a lot for the call. It's Patrick, quick question.
Yeah.
You said a conservative candidate. Was that somebody running on a third party, like the Libertarian Party? Because the Libertarian Party really didn't get much mojo going until the 60s and really the early 70s.
Well, now the Libertarians, what was the fellow's name? Two M's, his initials. He had two M's in the 70s.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Something.
Yeah.
Yes, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do.
Everybody said he was a nut.
Yeah, I can't remember his name.
Lyndon LaRouche. LaRouche.
Okay.
Now, was he a Libertarian?
No.
Oh, he was not.
No,
well,
he's got his own. Lyndon LaRouche has his very own cult of very strange conspiracy-minded people who
correct. Yes.
Who basically have just been trolls in our society for a long, long time.
But as I said, from what I remember growing up, conservative was always somebody loved the outdoors, loved the cops, loved the police, and believed you were spending money irrationally and to just do it slowly, and that was it.
Yeah.
And Republicans today are not conservatives.
Yeah, I'm with you. Okay, thank you, Patrick. Good to hear from you. And let me just recap this, because I really think that this is an important concept, an important point. And that is that the Republican parties, with the election of 1980, because of a Supreme Court decision 2 years earlier, the Republican Party, which legalized bribery of politicians by corporations, the Republican Party ceased to be a political party with a political perspective, with a governing worldview, with an idea about how the government should be run, and began to be what James Madison referred to in Federalist Number 10 as a faction. He talked about the spirit of faction. George Washington talked about the spirit of faction. By faction, they were not referring to political parties. They were referring to a small group of people who were pursuing their own self-interest to the detriment of the country. And that you will find that definition in Federalist Number 10 by James Madison himself. I think what we're seeing is the spirit of faction. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Gloria in Shannon, North Carolina. Hey, Gloria, you wanted to bring up something that I heard last night, and Rachel didn't do any follow-up questions on it, and I was like, whoa. Lev Parnas talking about Mike Pence's brother. Inform me.
Yes, and that came out a long time ago, back when he first started running for the seat. Because, he has the District 6, I believe, seat in Indiana now, the same district that Mike Pence was in. He's sitting in that seat now. And that came out then, but it was hurriedly hushed up. And I've never heard anybody touch on it since. And I've done my own investigation, and yeah, his company did do a lot of business with Russia and is Russia, Ukraine, and several other countries, small countries over there. Mm-hmm. And that's where he made his money. And it was mentioned last night, but nobody has done any follow up, and nobody's even mentioned it.
Yeah.
And I'm beginning to wonder what's going on with that situation.
Yeah, that's
what's
a good
going on with him.
That's a good one.
I wish somebody would follow up on it a little more in depth.
I do
somebody
too.
That might be able to.
Well, I will, when I get off the air, I'll do some digging around. You just reminded me of it. I thought of it last night, and then, just the events moved on, and it didn't stick. And I think that, this needs to be looked into. Gloria, thanks a lot for the call. Brent in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Brent, what's up?
Hey, Tom. So what is a Republican? You asked that question. The answer to that in modern society is a person who dislikes Democrats. That's about all it takes to be a Republican anymore. They don't have any real philosophy. They don't stand for anything. They stand in opposition of someone, and that's really their problem. But 1978, and you mentioned a couple of Supreme Court cases. I think that's really close to the year, but I attribute a lot of this air quotes conservatism, that move that seemed to occur right around that time, to the economist Milton Friedman.
Oh yeah,
who was not? Yeah, he was not a person who, as a former local union president, I think very fondly of, but I guess he did win a Nobel Prize.
Well, no, actually what happened was Alfred Nobel and his foundation never provided for a prize for economics. So when these right-wingers in the 60s or 70s wanted to give a prestigious prize to Milton Friedman, they invented this thing. It's actually the Nobel Prize for Economics, or it's a bank out of Sweden, as I recall, the Serges Bank prize in the memory of Nobel for economics. And I know I'm mangling the exact title, but it's not the Nobel Prize for Economics is not actually a Nobel Prize. And originally they developed it so that they could give it to right-wing economists so that they would be taken more seriously. Now the prize has been taken more seriously itself, and so even some progressive economists have won it. But that's where it came from. But yeah, Milton Friedman was the guy who, he of the Chicago School, he was the guy whose ideas informed Robert Bork, which led to a change in America's antitrust laws. He was the guy who informed Pinochet down in Chile, which led Pinochet to privatize the Social Security of Chile, which they're still struggling with. He was the guy, or his acolytes, really, with the Chicago School, were the ones who helped Russia reinvent themselves as a capitalist nation by voucherizing everything that everybody owned and leading directly to oligarchy in Russia. He's done mind-boggling amounts of damage in the United States and around the world. So yeah, I'm with you.
That book in '74 was entirely too influential to their party, and it stands on very weak economic foundation, and I think was proven in the 80s and early 90s to be a failed system. But
yes, it was a theory.
I don't know when they're going to figure it out. Yeah, it was a theory. I think it's a failed theory, and I think the evidence bears that out.
Yep.
I just don't know how we're going to get it back quickly. But we will get it back. I got faith in that.
I do too, Brent. Thank you very much for the call. Spot on. Scott in Orford, Michigan. Hey, Scott, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Good afternoon. It's Oxford, by the way.
Oh, okay. Oxford, yeah.
Yeah, no problem. So some of my observations about conservatives that I know and interact with on social media is they have a disdain for government programs because, it's coming out of my pocket, but then they have this until it happens to me condition that, now I need this. And the story about Ayn Rand, being a libertarian and objectivism and all that, she certainly took advantage of the U.S. healthcare system and the programs that helped her out in her
old age, when she had smoked for half her life or most of her life, and she got lung cancer. And in her old age, she went on both Social Security and Medicare paid for her lung cancer treatments.
Yes, and there was a story a while ago about a senator or a congressman in Texas that voted against Texas having some type of government of supply. It might have been around the time the ACA was passed, but he ended up having to go into the hospital for surgery, and he was no longer covered.
Oh, geez.
I can't remember. I can't remember the exact story about that, but I remember reading about it, and I just thought, now there's some irony.
Yeah, and there's more than enough irony to go around, and it's really sad. Scott, thank you. Thank you for the call, and thanks for your contribution, your thoughts on the subject and on the program today. It's 27, coming up on 28 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. And tell your friends about us. We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Senators are still signing their oath. And then Mitch McConnell is going to bring the curtain down, I'm guessing.
This is the Thom.
Our book today is Cyber War: How Russian Hackers and Trolls Helped Elect a President by Kathleen Hall Jamieson. This is from the introduction. Imagine a strategy memo forecasting cyber attacks by Russian hackers, trolls, and bots designed to roil social discontent and damage the electoral process of a major party U.S. presidential nominee. Or, if she winds up winning, sabotage her ability to govern. Guaranteed payoff, no fingerprints, no keystroke record, no contrails in the cloud. To ensure that Americans would believe that disparaging messages about her were made in the U.S., use Bitcoin to buy space and set up virtual private networks on American servers. Distribute hacked content stolen from the accounts of her staff and associates through an intermediary, WikiLeaks. Use identity theft, stolen social security numbers, and appropriated IDs to circumvent Facebook and PayPal's demand for actual names, birth dates, and addresses. On platforms such as Instagram and Twitter, register under assumed names. Diffuse and amplify your attack and advocacy through posts on Facebook, tweets and retweets on Twitter, videos on YouTube, reporting and commentary on RT, blogging on Tumblr, news sharing on Reddit, and viral memes and jokes on 9gag. Add to the mix a video game called Hiltendo, in which a missile-trading Clinton figure vaporizes classified emails sought by the FBI. Employ online agitators and bots to upvote posts from imposter websites such as blackmattersus.com to the top of such subreddits as r/TheDonald and r/Hillary for Prison. Drive content to trend. To maximize the impact of your handiwork, use data analytics and search engine maximization tools built into social media platforms. To test and fuel doubts about the security of U.S. voter information, hack the electoral systems of the states. And throughout the primary and general elections season, seed the notion that if Hillary Clinton were to win, she would have done so by rigging the election, an outcome that would repay her assaults on the legitimacy of their leader's presidency with doubts about her own. Were she instead to lose, she would no longer be a thistle in the toned torso of the hackers and trolls' boss's likely boss. Every result but one produces a desirable outcome for the Kremlin. Outcome 1, Clinton is off the international stage. Outcome 2, she wins but can't govern effectively. Outcome 3, the former Secretary of State is elected and the country simply moves on, but the sabotage nonetheless has magnified cultural tensions and functions as a pilot from which to birth later success, perhaps when she runs for a second term. The only eventuality that damages the Russian cyber soldiers and their commander-in-chief is the fourth, in which, in real time, the cyber attackers are unmasked by a vigilant intelligence community, condemned by those in both major political parties and around the world, characterized by the media as spies and saboteurs. The Russian message is blocked or labeled as Russian propaganda, and when included in media accounts, the stolen content is relentlessly tied to its Russian origins and sources. None of that, however, happened. Instead, to the surprise of the Russian masterminds, as well as both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, he won the Electoral College, and with it a 4-year claim on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Although countrywide she bested him by almost 2.9 million votes, he unexpectedly captured an Electoral College majority by running the table. By the end of the evening of November 8th, Florida, as well as Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, were in his column. The ways in which Russian hacking and social media messaging altered the content of the electoral dialogue and thus contributed to Donald Trump's victory are the subjects of this book. To begin my exploration, this overview chapter will highlight key findings of the U.S. intelligence community, preview my focus on the hackers and trolls and the synergy between them, justify casting the Russian machinations as acts of cyber war, outline ways in which susceptibilities in our system of government and media structures magnified their effect, and note 5 presuppositions that will shape my analysis of the Russian trolls' work, and one that will guide my study of the effects of the hackers. Forming the backdrop for my inquiry are 3 reports on the Russian intervention in the 2016 presidential election. The October 7, 2016 statement jointly issued by the Department of Homeland Security and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence on Election Security. The January 2017 conclusion of the U.S. intelligence agencies, CIA, FBI, NSA, and the February 2018 Robert Mueller indictment of 13 of the Russians allegedly behind the social media intrusions. On a day that will live in campaign lore, as much for what didn't happen as what did, more on that in a moment, the first of the 3 revealed the following. The U.S. intelligence community is confident that the Russian government directed the recent compromises of email from U.S. persons and institutions, including the U.S. political organizations. The recent disclosures of alleged hacked emails on sites like DCLeaks.com and WikiLeaks and by the Guccifer 2.0 online persona are consistent with the methods and motives of Russian-directed efforts. These thefts and disclosures were intended to interfere with the U.S. election process. Such activity is not new to Moscow. The Russians have used similar tactics and techniques across Europe and Eurasia, for example, to affect public opinion there. We believe, based on the scope and sensitivity of these efforts, that only Russia's senior-most officials could have authorized these activities. That's from the report. The next report put a name to one of those senior-most officials and specified an intended beneficiary, Donald Trump. Cyber war is the... Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Saturday, February 22nd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the 3rd in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Tom, I think the gist of conservatism in the United States is that whichever locus of power or control best suits them and their ideology is the one they prefer, whether that be at the state and local levels when they're in control there and not at the federal level, or at the federal level when they are not so controlled in the state, whichever one suits their ideology. And at points when they are not controlled at either level, then they become libertarians and say that no government entity should be able to tell me what to do or how to do anything. That's their libertarian point of view. And I mean the word should. Now, let me just highlight this because Kevin McCarthy just said today, here's his statement, the president should be able to determine how tax dollars are spent. He did not say the president has the constitutional power to determine how tax dollars are spent.
He said he should have.
That's not what the Constitution says.
Exactly. I was going to call his office and say, okay, maybe he should, but you better write a constitutional amendment because that's not what the Constitution says.
Right.
But you see, in terms of the Trump supporters, their mentality now is whatever it's how it should be in terms of our opinion. And when Donald Trump said, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, what he meant was, I should be able to shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue without any consequences whatsoever because I'm Donald Trump and I'm the greatest. And that's what his cult mentality has become. What it should be, not what it really is.
Right. So I guess the larger question ultimately that we're all going to face, Paul, is is this mentality shared by enough Americans that Donald Trump can get himself reelected? And that all these Republicans who have jumped in the bag with him, are they going to end up disgraced and out of office, or are they going to end up continuing to hold on to power?
Well, you know that the way it is, it has to do with not having the number of votes. It's the right proportions, right? It's where are your votes? And so, I think it's possible. It happened before, and no one thought it could. But it's possible that in some of these states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, I don't know how those will shake out, but there are enough people with that mentality in those states about how it should be, not how it is. And you can look at the way they look at it. Let's take the guns. What they prefer is that the federal government, via the Supreme Court, should be able to take away the power of the states to regulate guns. So what the Second Amendment really says is the federal government has no power to regulate guns in the states. The states have the power to regulate as much or as little as they choose, whether that means no regulations on guns, kind of like Nevada, or if a lot of regulations. But when the conspiracy that Scalia and Alito had was first the Heller decision, which meant that says essentially that the individual ownership of a gun is a right that you have as a citizen of the United States. And then Alito comes along with the 14th Amendment and says equal protection under the law. And that basically takes away the state's rights to regulate firearms. And even though the right to individual ownership is, these gun people think that what that means is I should be able to have any kind of gun I want. And if the state says no, then they're infringing on my Second Amendment right.
Right. Yeah. And there's the Second Amendment and the 10th Amendment too. In these places. Well said, Paul. Thanks a lot for the call. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. I wanted to throw a log on the fire of an earlier conversation you had. The caller was referring to how intel services deal with information, basically emails is what he was talking about. But there was an article in the New York Times recently that one of the Russian advanced persistent threat groups, I think Fancy Bear, they've been caught, collecting and amassing emails from Burisma in the Ukraine.
Right.
And the intel services, they're playing games with these advanced persistent threat groups anyways. And what I mean by games is they are, I can tell they're using this whole thing is a stock exchange. It's a market of information. Okay, all these intelligence groups from the United Arab Emirates to Japan to all of them. It's all just an information marketplace, really. But in that, they don't. The intel services, the security state, they don't go into that. Okay, they don't tell people that. What they're doing is they're plucking. Like Fancy Bear. There's one, it's got a cute name. Everyone can remember it. And, and it advances our national interest. That's why the other day when I mentioned if we'd reached a tipping point where the intel community might actually see Congress as an obstacle, and they might start actually, the center of gravity, for lack of a better word.
Dave, can you boil this down to the point that you're trying to make?
Yeah. The point I'm trying to make is certainly, if Donald Trump is emulating Vladimir Putin, and Vladimir Putin just consolidated power, and his intelligence services are amassing information on Burisma, they could certainly create some sort of image. They being, the Russian FSB could certainly create some sort of.
The bottom line of what you're saying is that just like when the Russians hacked the DNC server and got all those embarrassing emails, and John Podesta's as well, just like when they did that, they released them via WikiLeaks at strategic moments. In order to influence the campaign, that if they just successfully hacked Burisma, they probably found enough documents that, while not necessarily smoking guns, smoldering papers, let's say, things that could be taken out of context or could be misunderstood. Somebody complaining about Hunter Biden, not leaving enough donuts on the table or something, whatever it might be. And they can be feeding that stuff out as we go into the election, assuming Joe Biden is the nominee. Is that your point?
Yeah, sure. All these Republicans are unwitting agents of Moscow, the Kremlin. Yeah, sure. Yeah. They're pushing for Hunter Biden to testify at Trump's impeachment. Wouldn't it be nice to have some emails suddenly pop up that show Hunter Biden and Joe Biden's guilt? Wouldn't that be great?
I'm guessing that's going to happen, Dave. The question will be whether they're authentic or not, whether they're taken out of context or not, or whether they're just complete fabrications. But I fully expect, if Joe Biden is the Democratic nominee, that it's going to be Hillary's emails all over again. I fully expect it. Dave, thanks for the call. Ivan in Bartlett, Illinois. Hey, Ivan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, my definition of modern-day conservatives. Now, I'm going to include conservative Democrats and libertarians here. My definition is they are corporate fools voting, or corporate fools fooled into voting against their own self-interests.
You certainly see that.
You can go right down the line. You vote for climate deniers, you're voting against your own self-interest. You vote for warmongers, you're voting against your own self-interest. You vote against $15 minimum wage, you're voting against your own self-interest. You're voting for anti-union representatives, you're voting against your own self-interest. And Medicare for all, free college, tax cuts for the rich, voting against regulations, all of those are voting against your own self-interest.
Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable definition, and I'm with it. I'm with you. Ivan, thank you. Good one. Mike in Hope Sound, Florida. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, Tom, great show. Modern-day conservatives. It's very simple. The modern-day conservative is anybody who spends their political career and all their free time trying to beat down American Democrats and liberals. And that means owning the libs is their goal. Anything that comes with it, meaning treason, breaking laws, voter suppression, all that is excused. And along with it, your oath of office if you're a congressman. As long as you're beating Democrats or bashing the libs, you have carte blanche to break all these laws and to trample on our Constitution. And, of course, that's a broad statement, but that's the way I feel.
I think you've nailed it, Mike. And, in fact, probably the official declaration of that is Donald Trump Jr.'s new book, which is, just basically, an entire book full of snark against libs. But, let's keep in mind, America is a liberal country. It's like, Mike, thanks for the call. They're really trashing America. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And more of your calls in just a moment. It's 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Gary in Arlington Heights, Illinois. Hey, Gary, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. As far as what has become of conservatives or how you define them, actions speak louder than words. I just saw it. About 20 minutes ago, I watched Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell sign their oath to be a fair juror in the Senate.
Right.
after they have both said they're not going to be.
Right. So apparently an oath doesn't mean a whole lot to these guys, or they intend to change their behavior on the 21st when the Senate impeachment continues.
Yeah, so conservatives are not only hypocritical, but immoral. Top to bottom, even unto God.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. They're willing to put certainly not just party above country, but the interests of the people who own the party above country. Brian in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind?
Hi. And thanks for the conversation.
You're welcome.
I think the word conservative has to have a qualifier in front of it. For instance, I'm an environmental conservative, and I don't look like anybody who calls themselves a conservative in any other sense. Yeah. I've heard people call themselves fiscal conservatives. Without the qualifier, it's meaningless. It's like all the other labels: liberal, socialist. Well, Republican is getting kind of.
Yeah. Well, I get how you're applying this to yourself. You basically want to conserve the environment, so you say that you're an environmental conservative. I'm assuming that's what you mean. But my question is, what should we call these guys who call themselves conservatives, if not conservative? What does it actually mean when, Tom Tillis stands up on the Senate floor and says, I'm a conservative, or Devin Nunes, or Donald Trump for that matter? What does it actually mean?
They may call themselves conservatives, but they're really rallying under the Republican flag, which I've got a name for them, too. It's I take their old party affiliation and call them the GOP, or just GOP.
GOP?
Something to be avoided. GOP.
Yes. Nobody wants GOP on their shoe. I got it. Yeah.
That's something to be avoided.
Yeah. Okay, Brian, thank you very much for the call. That's a good one. I still, I wonder what has happened to people like my dad. I mean, I think I'm seeing them on TV on MSNBC, with Nicole Wallace and David Jolly and, these people who used to be Republicans. But back when they used to be Republicans and they were defending George W. Bush, they were defending, lying us into wars and, gutting the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act and all this kind of stuff. And so I don't get this conversion thing, or where they're going to go, or have they just said, okay, the Republican Party has become so corrupt that I'm going to have to become a Democrat, and I'll be one of those corporate Democrats. I'll be a Clinton Democrat instead of a Sanders Democrat. Is that what's going on? We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and just getting a few things done here. William in Minneapolis. Hey, William, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to KTNF. I will be in town there in a few weeks.
Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Oh, great. I hope I can get out and see you. I just want to touch, before I touch on the swamp thing, which is what I call Trump. He's the biggest swamp monster in the swamp. But as far as the conservative subject, I've never understood the whole label. I don't even know when that term came into effect, but I just think they're neo or something. They're definitely not conservative.
Mm-hmm.
Like the guy said before, everybody's conservative on certain issues, and they're social on other issues. I don't get the whole term.
Well, in that context, conservative means cautious, cautious.
Right. Right, and like the lady said before, I'm gonna touch on the problem with the Democratic Party, and I think we focus too much on I'm not saying we shouldn't care about the environmental issues and stuff like that, but like she was talking about that Mike Pence story, and I also want to talk about Trump, that order he signed to have people on SSI and SSDI requalify in 6 months.
Right.
Nobody carried that story for any length of time, and that's one thing the Republicans are good at. I mean, they hit the mom and pop issues, the common, like what does the guy call himself, the common man, I mean, people can identify with that, and I think that's where the Democratic Party fails at, is to reach the common person and get down to their level. Yeah. And sometimes we get too intellectual on things, and we get too philosophical on things, and you kind of lose a lot of people in that process. I'm not saying those issues aren't important, but things like the environment and everything, we can only deal with those things when we win some elections. When we get a president.
I think you make a good point, William. And yesterday somebody called in and said, instead of Democrats talking about Medicare for all and free college and all this, big stuff. I mean, it's kind of a given that we want to work in that direction. But what they should start out with is saying we're going to stop taxing your Social Security and your unemployment benefits. I mean, that's like right there on the ground, right?
Yeah, people can identify with that. They will get out and vote on that based on that issue alone, Yeah. And I think that's where we missed the boat at a lot of time, Like, what does he call himself? I don't know who the guy calls himself, the common man. I mean, he talk about common sense, down to earth, mom and pop type issues, and that's what people get out and vote for.
Yeah, I think you're right, William.
That's where we got to go.
Yeah, I think you're right. William, thanks a lot for the call. Matthias in North Hollywood. Hey, Matthias, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Glad to speak with you. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to have this opportunity. I just want to continue on the conversation that what is conservative, and obviously we're dividing across the platform, the spectrum in our politics today. And I think that we should have the opposite of progressive and classify them as regressionists at this point. And maybe in the not too long term, we probably will end up having more progressive. Not just progressive, but different political parties because of how the division is happening on both ends of the spectrum now. So maybe in the future we'll actually be having a little bit better representation.
So you're talking about using the words progress and regress, progressives, regressives.
Yes, exactly.
Going forward, going backwards. Yeah, that's a good one. I like that. Matthias, thank you very much for that. Marcia in Winter Park, Florida. Hey, Marcia, what's on your mind today?
Hi, well, this is the first time I've called in, but you know what? Anyway, let me turn my headphones off.
Yeah, what I'm going to do, Marcia, is put you on hold, and you can work that out with Lise. James in Spokane, Washington. Hey, James, what's on your mind?
Hey, my friend, how are you today?
Good. What's up?
Yeah, about conservatives. Basically, they're cowards. They're afraid to play in a game today that isn't rigged. You know what I mean? They've got no heart. But I want to talk about neckties. Tom, it seems all the conservative, monstrous things that have been done in my lifetime and credited to America were done by people in neckties. And I was wondering if you have an idea what the symbolism is of the necktie.
I don't know. I'm guessing. There are people who suggest that it's a phallic symbol. But I'm sure that there's actually a history to neckties that is probably some grand thing that has to do with men's fashion, but I just don't know. But yeah, I don't wear a necktie, and on very rare occasions do I wear a necktie, and although I did for years, but I was never happy about it. I'm with you, James. Thank you for the call. Lupe in Pueblo, Colorado. Hey, Lupe, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I've only been listening to you for a short while, but my comment
welcome.
is that, for the sake of being a liberal who wants to reach out to my conservative friends and family, you have to realize that they're actually a neurotic group who've been brainwashed or maybe brainwashed themselves into putting too much value into money.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you're rich, you have morals, you have everything, you have to do something good in your life to get there. And if you're poor, you're the scum of the earth.
Yeah, this is neo-Calvinism. John Calvin back in the 1600s said,
I think,
go ahead.
I don't know if you're familiar with Daryl Davis. I think we have to kind of go after them Daryl Davis style because, we're all still human beings. I'm a millennial and just tired of the negativity. I want everything to be positive. And I think we can, I really think we can move forward together as long as we help our conservative friends and family get out of that idea. No, you're not the scum if you're poor. No, you're not the greatest if you're rich. And we need to stop comparing each other that way.
Yeah, I'm with you. Well said, Lupe. Thank you very much for the call. Richard in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Richard, what's up?
Hi, Tom. What is a conservative in today's America? A fascist with lipstick.
Okay. A fascist who dresses well? All right.
You put lipstick on a pig.
Yeah, there you go. I get it now. I thought maybe there was a gender subtext to it, but I get it that there's not. Well said, Richard. Thanks so much for being with us today. Don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. By the way, the Senate, they finished their little song and dance of swearing everybody in, and they're going to resume on the 21st so that they can take a few more days to get some more conservative judges on the bench, presumably. So that will, we'll see where that all goes. Anyhow, don't get out there, get active, tag You're It, and tell your friends about progressive media. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Saturday, February 22nd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up till the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.